Sjöhaga Mental Hospital loomed like a gray-black monument among the dense fir trees in the Småland forest. Between the dark trees, the worn facade was glimpsed, windows like iron bars against the outside world. Eric Lindholm stared out through one of these windows, his fingers drumming nervously on the windowsill while the autumn rain lashed against the pane. He had been hospitalized for 3 months now, since his breakdown. In his diary, Eric wrote that evening, October 13, 2022, "The walls seem to be getting closer each day. Dr. Gustafsson says I'm making progress, but I feel more lost than ever. Lisa gave me an extra blanket today. She was the only one who saw that I was cold. Sometimes I think she's the only real person here." The corridor outside his room was quiet and desolate when darkness fell. Eric listened for the usual sounds, the staff's footsteps, the clattering of the medicine cart, the mumbling of other patients. But instead, he heard it again, a rhythmic scraping that seemed to come from the walls themselves. No one believed him when he told them about the sounds, or about the shadows that moved in the corner of his eye when the staff turned off the lights. Dr. Gustafsson called it paranoid delusions in his journal and increased the medication dose. But Eric knew better. There was something trying to reach him, something trapped in the hospital walls. "They come at night," he had written in his diary, "figures with empty eyes and mutilated heads. I think they want to tell me something. About the hospital, about the doctor, about what happens when the lights go out." Eric flinched when he heard the heavy door at the end of the corridor open. Dr. Gustafsson's steps were unmistakable, heavy, determined, as if the floor should yield under his authority. The old doctor with his white, well-trimmed beard and cold eyes that seemed to see right through his patients. Eric had seen how the other patients fell silent when the doctor approached, how they withdrew like frightened animals. The treatment room upstairs, where no patient ever told what happened, was Dr. Gustafsson's territory. In his diary, Eric had recorded rumors from other patients. They say he experiments with old methods in that room. Methods no longer used, methods that leave people as empty shells. Lisa Bergman sorted the medicines on the cart with experienced hands. She was new at Sjöhaga, only 6 months into her employment, but had already begun to see patterns that chafed within her. The unusually high doses, the frequent special treatments that Dr. Gustafsson prescribed, the extinguished looks in patients' eyes after these sessions. "How is Eric today?" she asked an older colleague who passed with arms full of journals. "As usual, talking about voices in the walls and moving shadows." Lisa nodded. She had read his journal, traumatic loss, psychotic breakdown, paranoia. But unlike many others, Eric still seemed sharp. Aware in a way that certain other patients no longer were. When she made her rounds later that evening, she stopped at Eric's room. He sat huddled on the bed, notebook in his lap. "May I see what you're writing?" she asked softly. Eric looked up with feverish eyes. "They don't want me to tell, they're watching me." Who? Eric, him and them. "The entity followed me back from the treatment room last week. I saw it, the body twisted as if the legs went in the wrong direction, the head deformed. It moves in time with the sounds in the walls." Lisa felt the familiar lump in her stomach. Hallucinations, Dr. Gustafsson would say. But there was something about Eric's descriptions, the details, that differed from typical psychotic experiences she had read about during her education. When she finished her shift that evening, Lisa stayed longer than necessary. She made her way to the basement archive where old journals were stored. Sjöhaga had been in operation since the 1940s, and she had heard rumors about the hospital's earlier practices. Lobotomy, electroshock therapy, forced confinement of unsuitable individuals. In the archive, she found a brown folder marked Treatment Protocols 1954-1968. In the half-light from the flickering fluorescent lighting, she read about experimental procedures, about patients who became calm after transorbital lobotomy. She froze when she saw the pictures, patients with empty gazes, doctors holding up sharp instruments that resembled ice cream sticks. At the bottom of the folder was a photo of a young doctor smiling next to the operating table. Lisa recognized the face despite the picture being over 50 years old. A younger, less wrinkled face, but the same cold eyes. Dr. Gustafsson. That same night when the corridors were quiet, Eric wrote in his diary. The unexpected and frightening sounds echo through the corridors at night again, scraping as if someone is dragging metallic tools along the walls, and the nails, I hear the nails scratching at concrete. Sometimes I think they're trying to tell me how it was, what happened here. Sometimes I think they want to warn me. The treatment room on the third floor had locked shutters for the windows and walls so thick that no sounds penetrated. Eric sat strapped in a chair that resembled an old dentist's chair, while Dr. Gustafsson prepared equipment on a stainless steel table. "Your hallucinations have gotten worse, Eric," the doctor said without looking up. "We must try something more direct." Eric tried to swallow, but his mouth was dry with fear. "They're not hallucinations. I see them, hear them. They want to tell what you did to them." Dr. Gustafsson's hand paused over the instruments. His gaze met Eric's, and for a moment Eric saw something other than clinical distance in the old man's eyes. Something that resembled fear. "What have you heard?" asked the doctor, his voice suddenly sharper. "They tell about how you opened their skulls, how you mutilated their brains with metal pins, how you reduced them to dolls, the entity with the deformed head. He was a poet before you took the words from him." Dr. Gustafsson gripped a syringe tightly. "Nonsense, you are sicker than I thought." But before he could approach, the door opened. Lisa stood there, pale but determined. "Eric is going back to his ward now. I've contacted hospital management about your unorthodox methods." Dr. Gustafsson paled but quickly regained his composure. "Miss Bergman, you're exceeding your authority. Leave before I report you." While they argued, Eric felt the temperature in the room drop drastically. In the corner of his eye, he saw how shadows in the corner condensed, took shape. The entity materialized slowly, a figure with twisted limbs and a head that seemed crushed on one side. Behind it came more, a procession of damaged figures moving toward Dr. Gustafsson. The doctor must have felt something, for he suddenly turned around. His eyes widened with a horror that Eric had never seen in the otherwise controlled man. "What the?" whispered the doctor. For the first time, Eric could see them clearly, not just in the corner of his eye or in dreams. Beings with wounds in their skulls, empty gazes, distorted bodies. They surrounded Dr. Gustafsson as if waiting for something. "They've been waiting for you," Eric said quietly. "All your patients, those who never left the treatment room with their minds intact." Lisa saw nothing, but she saw the fear in both Eric's and the doctor's eyes. She hurried to loosen Eric's restraints. "We have to go now," but Eric couldn't tear his gaze from the scene before him. Dr. Gustafsson backed toward the window, surrounded by figures only Eric could see. "Disappear," shouted the doctor. "You don't exist, you're not real." But the entity with the crushed head stretched out a hand, and when it touched the doctor's forehead, the old man collapsed with a scream that echoed throughout the entire hospital. Chaos erupted at Sjöhaga after Dr. Gustafsson's collapse. Ambulance personnel, police, and hospital management filled the corridors. Eric was kept isolated in his ward, monitored after what was described as a violent episode where he was alleged to have attacked the doctor. But Lisa knew better. She had been there, seen how the doctor collapsed without Eric touching him. She had seen the fear in the old man's eyes, as if he had seen something impossible. With trembling hands, Eric opened his diary that evening. "I saw them clearly today. They showed themselves to him too, finally. All those he had harmed over the years, all whose brains he had mutilated with his lobotomies. I don't think they wanted to hurt him, they just wanted to be seen." The night was unusually quiet, no scraping sounds in the walls, no whispers in the dark. Eric lay awake staring at the ceiling, unsure if the liberation he had felt earlier was real or imagined. Can you still see them? Lisa had snuck into his room during her night round, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. Eric shook his head. Not since the incident. It's as if they got what they needed. Lisa opened her bag and took out yellowed papers. I found this in the archive, the hospital's history. Dr. Gustafsson worked here already in the 50s as newly trained. He specialized in lobotomy, even when the method began to be questioned. There are journals. So many patients who never became themselves again. Eric received the papers with trembling hands. He recognized faces from the pictures, the same faces he had seen in his hallucinations. The poet who was described as violently creative before the procedure. The artist whose eccentric behavior was cured with a metal pin through the eye socket. "You believe me?" he asked quietly. "I don't know what to believe anymore," replied Lisa, "but I know something isn't right here." Dr. Gustafsson has continued with methods that are no longer approved. Not lobotomy, but things that are close, his special treatments. As they talked, Eric suddenly felt a presence in the room. Not threatening this time, but almost grateful. A cold draft swept through the room, and Eric saw the pages in his diary turn forward to a blank page. Before their astonished eyes, words formed on the paper, as if written by an invisible hand. "The truth, tell the truth, don't forget us." Lisa gasped, her rational worldview shaken to its core. "Is it, they want us to tell," whispered Eric, "about what happened here? About all who were forgotten?" 6 months later, Eric stood before Sjöhaga Mental Hospital for the last time. The building stood abandoned, closed after the extensive investigation that followed Dr. Gustafsson's mental breakdown. The old doctor himself was now in another hospital. The diagnosis was a severe psychosis triggered by stress and aging. But the investigation had dug deeper than that. Lisa's discoveries in the archive, together with Eric's testimony, had led to hundreds of cases of unethical treatment methods being uncovered. Not just from the past, but from recent years under Dr. Gustafsson's leadership. "Do you think they have peace now?" asked Lisa, who stood beside him with her hand resting lightly on his arm. She had supported him through the entire process, from patient to witness, and finally to discharge. Eric regarded the building's facade one last time. "I haven't seen or heard them since that night, but I continue to write their stories, so they won't be forgotten." In his diary, Eric had documented everything, the hallucinations that perhaps weren't hallucinations at all, secrets about the hospital's past and treatments performed by Dr. Gustafsson, the sounds that echoed through the corridors at night. The diary entries that gave insight into Eric's psychological state had now become important testimony about institutional abuse. "Mental illness has always been a way to control people," Eric said quietly. "A way to silence those who don't fit in. Sometimes what are called delusions are just another kind of truth." As they turned to leave the place, Eric felt one last cold draft from the building. Not threatening or frightening this time, but like a whisper of thanks. In his new diary, the one he had started after his discharge, were his final words about Sjöhaga: "The truth cannot be lobotomized away. It remains in the walls, in the memories, in the voices that refuse to be silenced. I was never crazy, I was just the only one who listened."